Let's talk about redfish in South Carolina. They're probably the most popular and economically important fish in our inshore waters. And turns out that their numbers are in decline. They're about as low as they've been in recent history. So I decided to interview a friend of mine, Matt Perkinson from SCDNR, so that we could get all the data all about redfish, what about their biology, how they're managed, how we measure the abundance of fish, and what we're planning to do about it based on what we know about the species. So before we dive into it, I wanted to just talk a little bit about management. What I've learned, I think always use myself as an example, um, that most people just don't understand the facts about the fish that we catch. And I'm a big example of that. I often had no idea about anything about the fish that was on the end of my line. So one of the goals of Release Over 20 is to educate the general public so that they know the basic facts. They don't have to read a research paper, but we're going to try to sift all that knowledge down into things that you can remember and use to make educated decisions going forward. So when we talk about managing redfish, you may not know that all the redfish that we see inshore in our creeks, in shallow water, primarily are subadults, meaning they have not yet spawned. They don't reach spawning age at the very earliest until 27 inches for males, 33 inches for females. But that's only the first time that they can spawn. They don't really become really productive until a little bit bigger than that. So let's just say, for sake of argument, 34 inches and above, the bull reds. We all know that there's two kind of reds. There's like inshore puppy drum, and then there's bull reds, the big heavy ones, or old drum is what we sometimes call them. So what we're talking about when we're talking about spawners are these old fish, the big ones, and they live a long time. They can live, up to 40, sometimes even 50 years. So when you catch a bull red, you don't really know if it's 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years old. But we have to treat them as if they're maybe older than we are. Like, respect your elders, in other words. Um, but anything that we do to restrict keeping fish while they're smaller, you have to remember that that's a delayed effect. They're not going to contribute to the spawn until they're old enough to spawn. So it might be a few years. Let's say if we reduce the creel limit, it's going to be 2, 3, 4 years till you see that effect in the fishery. But there's things that we're doing to the spawners that have an immediate effect, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So here's where Dave gets beat up, probably by a lot of people. So the reason all these fish in the summertime are coming inshore is because they're preparing to spawn and then in the process of spawning. And once they're done, they're going to start running the beaches. We catch a lot of them on the shore, on the surf at that point. And then eventually they'll move offshore again. But we're all happy and excited about the quote unquote running of the bulls, where everyone's able to hold up a trophy sized redfish. And I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of fun. I've done it myself. I didn't really realize what was happening was they were spawning. And the thing is, their spawning window is relatively short. It's a few weeks. So I'm just going to throw this out there because if you follow Release Over 20, you know that what we're trying to do is influence anglers to be more restrictive than the law allows if it makes sense from the science standpoint. Well, this is exactly in line with that. So if you think about it, we have a multitude of boats day in, day out, all day long in the places where these fish are congregating to spawn. And we've got heavy weights and cut mullet on circle hooks down there. We're pulling them up. You have to admit, a lot of them are getting eaten by sharks. And even if they're not, you have to admit that they're probably pretty stressed out from being caught. And that's even if we handle them well. And it may affect their spawn. So these fish are in there trying to spawn, and then they get handled really roughly. they're probably going to be messed up for a few days. Well, what if that perfect spawning window was during that time? They might not spawn at all, or their spawns might not be successful. When you look at the data, what we really need to do is protect the spawn and the spawners. So it's all about getting more fish into that spawning population, but then letting them spawn so that they're successful. If we do that, we'll kind of have a lot of fish in our inshore fisheries. Now, I started fishing here in 2006, and I've seen it when it's been good. Like every flat would have hundreds of redfish on it. You know, it was not uncommon to be going down the creek and see a football field size area of nervous water in a school of redfish coming down the creek in the wintertime. We just don't see that anymore, but we can. So this is hopeful. We want to see this turn around. We all do. So does DNR. Despite what you might think, DNR wants there to be a more abundant fishery so that we can all have a successful time fishing for them. They're not trying to take away a right to fish. They want more abundance of fish. Problem is, we're not seeing the response yet in the abundance come up at. So we're going to try to do what we can to turn that around. So without further ado, please listen to this whole thing. It's about an hour, but it's really informative, and I hope you get a lot out of it. And thanks for hearing me out. So I have a special guest today, Mr. Matt Perkinson. Matt is the coordinator of the saltwater fishing outreach and education programs for South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. He's originally from North Carolina and received his undergraduate degree in political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a Master in Environmental Studies from the College of Charleston. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina with his wife, Katie, daughter, Sarah, son, Fletcher. He's a mediocre tennis player and drummer, and fishes in salt and freshwater as much as his family will tolerate. He's sandbagging a little bit on his fishing skills. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Matt. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I just want to say I appreciate all that you do for our natural resources and most of all, your friendship. We've been friends for going a good ways back.
Yeah, probably close to 20 years now, 15 at least.
And you haven't always been in this role. Like, what else have you done at SCDNR?
Yeah, so I started in aquaculture, so in our mariculture section, doing stock enhancement research, fish stocking, a lot of fish tagging, using stocked animals to answer questions about the wild environment there, tracking stocked animals into the wild. And then about, I want to say it's probably 6.5 years now, I moved over into outreach and education. And so, yeah, now I get to talk about fishing all day, every day.
Yeah, I think one of the first times we interacted was when you were working in the trout spawning tanks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So my partner Ralph and I had asked Matt if we could come and put a GoPro in the trout tank while we fed the trout, and he graciously allowed us to do that, given the precautions of like sterilization and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. Like, we did it, I think, the first time so you mimic the seasonal changes in water temperature and things, right? So I think we first did it in the winter. And
right.
he said, Dave, I don't know how good it's going to be. These fish are kind of sluggish. And I'm like, that's cool. We want to see that too. So sure enough, you'd put like a big old shrimp in there and they'd just be lazy and slowly slurp it in. And you said, you really need to come back in the spring when we warm this thing up. And we did. And it was like night and day.
Yeah. So much more aggressive. Still waiting to see that footage. One of these days I'll
I was telling Matt that I'm still sitting on that footage. It's on an old Mac that I haven't touched in like 10 years. And I don't even know if I know the password to it anymore. So I'm going to try to dig that out. I'd really hate to lose it, but I've been sitting on it forever. Anyway, enough of that. So the subject today is redfish in South Carolina. And we've had a lot of discussion about this lately. And I'm going to pull up a slide, which is going to be kind of the foundation of our discussion. which is this one. Can you kind of explain what this chart is all about?
Yeah, so that's a chart of our trammel net survey and the number of fish that are caught on average statewide per net set over time. So just to back up a moment, we have really three main surveys that we get a ton of data on red drum from. Our electrofishing survey goes year round. We have a long line survey that really captures those bigger fish, the adults. And then really our primo survey is our trammel net survey. And you may have seen these boats before. They're kind of funny looking. The motor's sort of a midship there. And what those boats do is they will encircle a 600-foot section of shoreline with a trammel net, a 3-paneled net. They go through that area. They spook those fish off the bank. Everything makes its way through the first panel of that net and is stopped in the middle. And after they've spooked those fish off the bank, they'll pull that net in. Every fish that comes in gets measured. Certain fish get a genetic sample. Certain fish are tagged. The vast majority of those are released back after that. And that survey has been going on since the late 80s. Really, about 1991 is when it got finalized using the methodology that we use today. But the real beauty of that is the folks that run that survey are out there hundreds of days of the year. They are doing thousands of net sets all up and down the coast from a big universe of different sampling sites. And the beauty of that is that you can look at trends. So they're doing this similar now than to how they were doing it years ago. And we can say, okay, in 1990, we were catching this many red drum per net set. In 2000, this many. 2010, this many. 2020, this many. And so it's a great way to look at trends. And so if you look at this chart here, you can kind of see we've had some peaks and valleys. But the main concern is that since about 2010, we've seen a general decline in the number of red drum that we've caught per net set. And that, this survey was designed specifically with red drum in mind. It's a very efficient methodology for capturing those juvenile red drum. And so what we're seeing is that, there aren't as many fish out there in the places that are sampled as there were in 2010. That's been declining over the last 10 to 15 years. So
each data point represents thousands of net sets, right?
Right. That's averaged out over the whole entire coast.
So if you know anything about statistics, like you can be pretty confident that that's a real number. Like it's not a fluke. It's not like you go to the same bank on one day and you catch 25, and you go to the same bank the next day and you catch 1.
Right.
It's totally different than that. You're talking about thousands of sets. And the abundance of fish kind of dictates that if there's more of them, they spread out, right?
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, the way we see a decline in a fishery, specifically something like red drum, that are kind of easily findable. When we see a decline, it doesn't mean you're not going to go out there and still see any red drum. They're still going to be on those really good habitats. They're on the best places. If you know what you're doing, you can go out and you can catch those fish. What it means is that you may not see as many fish in the schools that you encounter. You may not see as many schools in a general area. So think about it in times of abundance. You might think in a general area, you're going to have fish on the absolute best habitat. But because there are so many fish out there, you've also got fish spilling over into kind of, good habitat, maybe some marginal habitat. What happens is that number of fish starts to decline, is those fish really are not going to be present on those marginal habitats. They're only going to be on those best habitats. And again, there probably are not going to be as many fish even on those best habitats.
Understand. So I gave a little preview here of at least before COVID, actually, you could, as a regular member of the public, you could sign up to volunteer on trammel net surveys. And this is my own pictures that I took on a day of trammel netting. I'll tell you what, that's hard work.
Yeah,
I give a lot of respect for those people that do that every day, because man, it ain't easy.
That's right.
You can also do, so I don't know, can you still do this, Matt? But you can also volunteer to do electrofishing. That's what this is. I've done this as well. Is it?
Yeah, there will be opportunities in the future for sure to get back into volunteering with the trammel net and electro
Yeah.
fishing circle.
If you have any interest in time, I highly recommend you do it, because I think it'll help, especially if you're doubtful about how the data is collected. This will give you an appreciation for it, how it's actually done. But this day was burned into my memory for the rest of my life, where we were going along, and here's a good example of, like, in brackish water, getting a nice largemouth and a redfish in the same set. And then, so what they do, explain how electrofishing works, Matt. It's
Yeah,
little bit different, right?
yeah, and the electrofishing typically happens in freshwater. We have a specialized boat that can operate from the freshwater reaches of our rivers all the way down into kind of brackish water. So anywhere from 0 parts per thousand, that's how we measure salinity in the water, to about 8 parts per thousand, which is somewhere around a quarter strength seawater. So that's going to be a little further up in your estuary. This is a boat with a great big generator. There's 2 big prongs that go onto the front of this boat with leads that go into the water. And as they're moving along, they're trying to put out a constant wattage to create an electrical field around them. Fish are shocked. They come up to the surface. The people that you see in the picture here have these really long handled dip nets. They've got to be really on top of their game, because sometimes fish only come up for a brief moment. Got to be ready to scoop those fish up. You can see in the picture here, you've got a big aerated live well in the middle of that. You run through a specific section, I believe it's a quarter kilometer that they do. They put all the fish into there. And at the end of that section, you stop and you work up all those fish, similar to what we talked about with the trammel net. You're getting links, genetic samples, you're tagging some fish. And this survey allows us, the trammel net mostly operates down in the lower parts of our estuary. The electrofishing survey is really great up in those upper parts, so that we're getting a full picture of, what our species composition looks like, and numbers of fish up in those upper parts of the estuary too.
And that's really because the electrical field doesn't really work in saltwater, right? It's like, it'd be a great tool to have if you could do it in the
Yeah,
saltwater.
if I could figure out how to shock in saltwater, I will retire tomorrow, and that will be how I'll make my millions, because it would be, it's a really great way to capture those fish. But the conductivity down in saltwater makes it so that it doesn't work properly.
Yeah. And the right photo here was one specific tree where all those fish came out of. I could not believe it, because I fished this creek and I've caught a few fish there, but when I saw what came up, and a lot of people think those fish are dead right there, they're not. So they're just stunned. And I don't think a single fish that we shocked that day didn't make it. Like, in fact, I'm holding that giant carp up, which I never knew there was carp in this area, by the way, till that day. They said, you better be careful, because when he wakes up,
They're strong.
he's going to freak out, and they are very strong. But yeah, so that's a neat thing to volunteer for if you can. But that's where those data points come from. So can we talk a little bit? Well, actually, I want to talk a lot about the life cycle of a redfish, because one thing I've come to appreciate is that every species of fish has got to be managed differently because of how they spawn, how they live, and whatnot. So just for example, if you take spotted sea trout, they're pretty much living in our estuary their whole lives. They could live 9 years. So you're going to have opportunity to catch 10 inchers, and you got an opportunity to catch a 27 incher. They're always there. They don't go anywhere, right? So let's talk about redfish. So this chart might be a good sort of basis to start from.
Yeah, you want me to just sort of walk you through?
Yeah, just walk through it. Yeah.
Red drum are definitely a little different in that the adults sort of operate differently than the juveniles. And I'm just going to say, juveniles being anywhere from about 0 to 4 to 5 years old. Those are those fish that most folks are fishing on. Those are or your fish that are in the slot in South Carolina, that 15 to 23 inch fish, those are all juveniles. None of those fish have reached maturity. None of them are, spawning age yet. So once they reach about, 4 to 5 years old, they are becoming mature. They're starting to kind of hang out in different areas. Once they really get to that 7, 8, 9, those large 36 plus inch fish, they are really spending more time in the nearshore ocean, in the openings of our inlets, that sort of thing. They'll spend a lot of time in the wintertime out in 40, 60 feet of water or further. And so every year, those adult fish, those fish that, let's say 36 inches, plus, they're moving into our estuaries. They're spawning in the mouths of our estuaries. Typically around, our peak spawning in South Carolina is August and September. So red drum are going to spawn during that time. It's a very short spawning window. They're producing eggs that float into the estuary. Those larvae will hatch out, and they're settling out in our tiny little ditches and creeks and sort of estuarine areas that hold water, even at dead low tides, but very small sort of nursery areas. Those larvae are going to be there, until about the next spring. We start to see fish that are 6 to 7 inches. So let's say a fish born on September 1. By the time the next spring it's 6 to 7 inches, they're kind of moving out of some of those nursery areas into our bigger creeks. By their first summer, June, July, they're going to be 10, 11 inches. That's about the first time you start catching them. So those very small fish that you first catch, let's say, 10 to 12 inches, those are fish that are in their first summer after being spawned the previous September. So first fall, fish in South Carolina are going to reach that minimum size of 15 inches really around October, November of their first fall. So they're just a little bit over a year old. The next, over the next year, they will hit about 21, 22 inches that next fall, and they'll hit that upper slot limit of 23 inches, typically by that December or January. So they're really only in the slot from a little over a year old to a little bit over 2 years old.
That's interesting. So, and the other thing is, I've kind of thought about this, is the sizes that you find inshore are kind of like in steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that spawning window is so short.
Yeah.
Like you'll find an abundance of 15 inchers. Like, it's like all I'm catching are 15 inchers, and then there's like a few inch jump to the next one because it's like the next year class, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly the way you said it, because there is a short spawning window, and because males and females, unlike a spotted sea trout, they grow pretty similarly. You can't look at a red drum and say that's a male, that's a female, unless you actually hear it drumming. Then it's a male. So yeah, if you're in the fall and you're catching 15 to 16 inch fish, that came from a specific year class. Those are 1 year old fish. If you're catching 21, 22 inch fish, those are 2s. If they're 26 inches, those are probably 3s. Maybe 4 year olds are a little over 30, and then it gets kind of squirrely where you've got some fish that are growing a little faster than others, and it's tougher to just tell strictly by length. But yeah, very easy to look at specific year classes that pulse through the fishery.
So there's a lot of things like that you said in here that are worth sort of dwelling on. So one is that how quick they move through the size range where we catch them inshore. It's just a few years.
Right.
But the other thing is, like what I've shaded here in green is 40 plus years of being the spawning biomass. The large fish are living a long time, and they have the opportunity to spawn every single year out there. So it kind of, you don't know if you look at that, how that chart flattens out. If you catch a 40 incher, you don't know if it's 15 years old or 40 years old.
Right.
It could be either one.
Yeah, they really start to slow down in length. They may get a little bit more barrel shaped over time, but yeah, absolutely. You catch a 42 inch fish, there's really no telling how old that fish is. And and one thing that means is, even with the adult fish, you could, if you have a decline in the adult fishery, it takes a while for it to happen, because that fishery is made up of 40 different, let's say South Carolina, 30 some different year classes of fish. So yeah, it may take a while to make a dent in that population or really see changes in that population. On the converse side of that, once you do start seeing a change, it takes a while for that to really recover and rebuild that whole population in the adults.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute as well. But another thing you said, we've tried to put this out with Release Over 20, because I didn't even know this at first either, but that all of our slot size fish have never spawned.
Right.
So if you keep an upper slot fish, that's never had a chance to contribute to the future. It's just important to know. It's just arming people with knowledge so they can make an informed decision. No one's saying you can't, but they're saying, this is the effect that you can have when you take that fish out of the population. It's never spawned.
Right.
A lot of people will say, well, why don't you make the slot larger so that, like other states, well, even if it's 27, it still hasn't spawned.
So, that's right.
So you're talking about needing to be 27 to 33 inches or so till it starts to spawn the first time.
Till it's even capable of spawning.
Yeah, right.
That's probably not even then, that's not that maybe for a male might be capable of spawning there, but that's 33 inches is not going to be a reliable spawner. And for a female, obviously, they're going to be much larger than that before they're really a reliable and successful spawner.
Right. And even then, they're not really accessible to most inshore anglers because they're too big. They've already sort of starting to move their way up near shore or away from the creeks where we usually fish.
Yeah, they definitely sort of segregate out once they get to adult size.
So you said that in the winter, they kind of move offshore in schools. We've heard some people being able to find and target them in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. But do they also hang around inlets, you said, pretty much year round? Or because it seems like right now there's a lot of people catching bull reds at the jetties and whatnot, so they're still around, right?
Yeah, and we're kind of in that pre-spawn stage right now where fish are going to be starting to aggregate up. I always sort of caution myself from generalizing really anything about all. I've been tracking fish movement for 20 years, and anytime you think you have a pattern down, there's always fish that do strange things. We see fish in certain estuaries in the dead of winter where maybe those bulls are there that we wouldn't necessarily expect, or and sometimes they change their patterns over time. But for the most part, you have fish in the wintertime that are moving offshore. A lot of times you'll have a push of those fish in the spring. They may move back out, and then they're moving back in July, and especially again in that, August, September when they're spawning, and they tend to stick around post spawn too, where they're available in the estuary after that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you made about absolutes, right? Because a lot of times that's where you get people saying, "Oh, that's a lie. That's not true. I've seen this or that," and we get that too with Release Over 20. Like we always say, a female trout will spawn 20 million eggs a year. And depending on what paper you read, it might be 17 million, it might be 23 million. The thing is, does it change the point? What if that number is plus or minus 10%? No.
Right.
The point is that it's tens of millions of eggs.
Yeah.
It's the same point.
Good example of that is I used to have to cut a lot of otoliths and age fish all the time. And, you can look at the graph and this fish at this size should be this old. And I remember cutting a fish open that was 13 inches one time, aged that otolith, and it was 6 years old. And you just never know. You've always got fish that are going to surprise you and aren't doing what they're supposed to do. But we kind of try to speak in general terms of this is what the trend is.
Yeah. And that's something I paid attention to a lot, because even if you look at this chart, look at age 4 fish, and you can see they go anywhere from 25 to 40 inches. Right. That's just the different growth rates. It's like the Danny DeVitos and the Kareem Abdul-Jabbars, right? It's your natural tendency to grow at a certain speed. So you said they spawn in our state August and September. Like, how do we know that?
So we've done a lot of studies over time of putting out plankton nets, actually capturing eggs and larvae coming in at certain times. There's been several studies that have used acoustics that can kind of follow these. When the males and females are creating these big spawning aggregations, they're listening for the males that are drumming at certain times.
Do they do that like trout do? Like they'll be heavy drumming during the
Yeah,
spawning? Okay,
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So when I used to work on the stock enhancement side of things, the way that we would get adult red drum to spawn in our tanks, we controlled the photo period, so we can control daylight throughout the year and sort of simulate that we're getting into late summer and fall. But the way we would get a spawn is that we would drop the temperatures in the tank, down 5 degrees or so to simulate a cold front coming in, maybe the approach of late summer fall, and then we would raise those temperatures back up, and like clockwork, 2 days later you get a spawn just like that. So
Very interesting.
it's a combination of those photo cues and then also the thermal side of it too. The temperature is what's making them spawn.
Fascinating. So where exactly are they spawning? Do we know
So
that? Like, do we know
yeah,
that?
I mean, we
Well,
know some known spawning areas, and these things change over time too. In the mouths of our inlets, it's mostly open water sort of areas. So, several spots around the Charleston Harbor, Winyah Bay jetties, and some open areas in Winyah Bay. Typically, it's high salinity areas, so close to the ocean. Most of the time in the late afternoon and the evening, and yeah, it's areas of high current flow. Presumably they're spawning, and an incoming tide is carrying those eggs and larvae further up into the estuary where they can settle out into those nursery areas and be successful.
will the female spawn, like, do we know how many times they'll spawn during that season?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they do spawn multiple times. I want to say that they can spawn every 3 to 5 days or something like that.
Kind of like, sounds like trout. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe confusing trout with red drum. Drum may be a little bit longer than that. But yeah, female will spawn several times over the course of a season. During those couple months of spawning.
Very interesting. Thanks for all that. Hopefully people learned something from this. I think I actually learned a few things as well. So that's good. So I pulled this chart that you'd sent me. We've seen this in the Marine Advisory Committee, and this is showing the spawning stock biomass. So this is basically those large bull reds, and it's showing that they sort of peaked in like 2006 or 7, 8, something like that, and they've kind of been on a decline. And so how do we get this data? Is it the longline surveys?
So it's a combination of that uses some of the longline data. It also is, if you think about that trammel net survey data that we saw, some of that can be simulated out through the way this fishery is managed is all about how many fish make it through the gauntlet and escape into the adult population. And so
what they call it escapement, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's one of the reasons that that all these fisheries are managed at a certain size before they get to reproductive age. Is you're trying to harvest a certain amount of them during that time period, but once they get past a certain size, they have escaped. They haven't necessarily escaped predators, but they've escaped us, and presumably make it out into the adult population. So the more of those fish you have at 2, 3, 4 years old, of course, the more of those that are going to escape into the adult population over time. And so when you see a steady decline in the number of those, the size of those year classes, you, of course, are going to see this number of now 10, 12, 15, 20-year-old fish is going to decline over time as well.
Do we have any way of knowing like how many fish are in the spawning biomass? I understand it's hard. It's a hard question to answer, but
it would be a hard question for me to answer. I know that it's the actual stock assessments that have been done, both on a regional level and on a state level, do have some ways to model that and estimate what spawning stock biomass is. That's what you're looking at here. I do think that's a combination of modeling out how many fish are escaping out of that juvenile size, and then some of the data coming from the longline survey. But I couldn't tell you exactly how they come to
Yeah.
that figure.
Okay. Interesting. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and ask questions that people are probably asking themselves
Sure.
as they're watching this.
Yeah.
And it's okay not to have all the answers. So this is an important one here. So can you explain what this chart is?
Yeah, so recruitment is just really the number of fish that are being added to the population every year. So
And how
and
do you can you like how do you get this data?
yeah,
How do you get a data point?
so this is mostly coming from TrammellNet data. You're looking at the number of the amount of what we call young of year or age one fish every year. And so those are fish that, let's say they're spawned in September. The trammel net starts to catch them about the next July or so. So this is kind of in there, that first full year being caught from about July through December. What's the abundance of fish from that 1 year class? So you'd
So
be catching 2020 year class fish in the fall of 2021. You'd be catching 2024 year class fish in the fall of this year, basically. And
right, and
so,
and just going back to what you said about growth. So this fish spawned in like August, September of like
mhm,
1 year are going to be that 12 to 15 in the spring. So where
or
you
the following fall,
showed
yeah.
like right, sorry. Your other chart showed like the total or the average number of fish per set. This is breaking it further down into size,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the other one was all sizes combined that's caught in the trammel net. So that's a mixture of 1 year olds, 2 year olds, 3 year olds, 4 year olds all added into that. And so, you know, this recruitment that we're talking about, the number of fish that are being added each fall isn't, static. That varies very highly over time. And so what you can see here is that if you look on the right there, we had some good years of recruitment right around 2009, 2010. Then we had quite a lull. We have not seen a good year class of fish, a good new crop of fish enter the fishery until the fall of 2022, where you can see that's that last spike you see there. And we did have a really a good class of fish in 2022. Unfortunately, we didn't see in 2023 those, that it didn't carry through. We didn't get a second good year class of fish there.
So here's the question everyone wants to know. Why? Why do we get a good year in 2022 out of the blue?
It is one of the most complicated things there's so many variables that go into what makes a good year class and what doesn't. And so some of those things we talked about, this is a short spawning window. So those fish, I say September, August and September, but it can be even shorter than that. You need everything to line up right. You need the water temperature to be right. You need the right amount of rainfall for those larvae to survive. You need wind patterns to be going in the right direction, so those fish are being pushed into nursery areas. You need in those nursery areas, you need high quality nursery where all of those tiny little prey items from the little tiny zooplankton that they're eating in the first couple of days, they've got to get them from their first feed, to day 3. And then there's got to be grass shrimp and possum shrimp and all these things that they're eating in their first month to get them, from 3 days old to 1 month old. So there's a ton of things that, I hate to throw my hands up and say, I don't know. But the other part of that is you need the adults to be doing their thing successfully. So you've got to have a successful spawn out there. You got to have enough adults in the right places spawning at the right time so that there's enough larvae even making their way back into the estuary to get to that point. So lots and lots of different variables. I'm not sure what it was in 2022 because there's so many variables. There's a lot of noise in that system. It's really hard to narrow down to what exactly causes a good year class.
Yeah, after our last MAC meeting, I asked the biologists like same question. I said, and they said, well, they're looking at everything.
Yeah.
Temperature, like storms, rainfall, just trying to put kind of what can we figure out that's causing a successful spawn and what's not. And the other thing I asked was, what if we had 2 or 3 consecutive years like we had in 2022, and they said, oh, everything will be great. Like it'll really make things better, like significantly better. And it's like, oh, we got to figure out, well, obviously there's so many factors that we don't know what it is. But one thing is for sure statistics, right? It's like the more fish are spawning successfully, the more eggs there's going to be.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So got to protect the spawners. That's kind of jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but so
Yeah.
let's talk about this 2022 year class. Okay, this is just on the water experience. I fish in some of the redfish tournaments, the low country, the Southern Redfish Cup. That whenever they come to Charleston, my partner and I fish it. And the last year, like 2024, I think the top 10 teams had over a 12-pound bag, 3 fish in our upper slot to 23 inches. That's 3 line painter fish, and it often took 13 pounds to win. And what that tells me is that there is a lot of upper slot fish to be caught. Well, guess what your class that was, right?
Yeah.
That
So
was
many twos.
and this year they're 25 to 27 inches, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Those
there's
fish.
a lot of those around, so everyone thinks it's great.
Yeah.
But I told my buddy Steven, who's an avid fishes like the whole tour, I said, dude, like it's gonna be a lot harder to catch a 12-pound bag in the next few years. And he's like, why? I said, because the recruitment's been terrible, except for that 1 year class. So I think, we talked about the narrow range for which these fish are accessible to us. And it can be something like that 1 year class that makes it seem like everything's great. Like fishing's as good as it's ever been because there's so many slot fish around. Well, we're about to find out what happens. Those fish move out and then you're left with the next year class, which isn't so great, right?
Right.
So I hate to be like negative about it, but that's going to be the reality.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point that 1 year class can make things look good while those fish. And you think about it, when you're inshore fishing on those juveniles, you're really only targeting 3, maybe 4 year classes of fish at any given time.
Yep.
So yeah, if one of those is a really good class, you're going to say, man, the fishery is great. But yeah, one class doesn't mean that the fishery is fully recovered. And if the next year is not good, then you're going to see a kind of a revert back to the mean there a little bit.
Yep, that's right.
If you look at the graph here, one thing that is a little concerning to us is that we used to see a strong year class of fish, every 3 or 4 years or 5 years, a real bumper crop come through. And again, we're about 13 years in between really good year classes there. And so we're hoping that we don't see such a long spread between good year classes going forward.
Right. Yeah, I think that's all of our hopes. So I thought this was an important chart to show. I'd asked you to send this to me before because I'd seen it in one of our meetings, and it was pretty shocking to me. So what is this chart?
So that's the number of saltwater trips. This is specific to South Carolina, both just by all recreational anglers. That's your y-axis on the left over here. So these are in completely different units, but showing that there's somewhere between 10 and 11 million trips going on overall in saltwater in South Carolina every year. And then you've got a graph of the chartered trips every year, which has been increasing, but really is more in the 100,000 or so a year.
Right. And so to help people understand this chart, the solid line that you see on top, the scale for that is on the left axis, the number of recreational angler trips. And the dashed line on bottom and also the light gray is the charter, and then the MRIP charter, which you can explain what that is, but that's on the right axis, the number of charter angler trips, just to help you interpret. So like those two lines, the light gray and the solid black, even though they look like they're overlapping, aren't overlapping. They're on different scales.
Yeah.
So some people may not have a lot of experience looking at charts, but I summarized it below. So this, like you said, and this was shocking to me. I had no idea. 10,500,000. So this is a boat going on the water fishing. So if I go on the water, I probably go 50 something times a year. My 50 is part of that number.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
That's a lot of trips. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. It continues to increase.
Yeah. And so what's the difference between the dash line and the light gray line?
It just depends on how you're looking at the chartered trips. We have a charter logbook program where our charter vessel permit holders are required to report their trips over time. We get tons of good data from that logbook program, but we know that reporting is not 100%. So another way of looking at that is the MRIP survey. That is the NOAA fisheries method of looking at the number of trips that have been made. The other gray line is looking at the MRIP data. So the answer is somewhere probably between those, the number of charter trips that are being taken in South Carolina, which is about somewhere about around 1% of the overall trips.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to point out, is that if you look at those numbers, so a lot of people will say, oh, it's the guides. The guides are putting all the herding on all the fish. It doesn't really pan out when you look at the hard data, which this is. So, probably a guide is going to be able to catch more fish than the average recreational angler. That's fine. But the thing is, there's literally one guide trip for every 100 rec trips. So it's 100 to 1 difference. So you can't really say that rec anglers aren't part of the problem. It's like,
I think
it's because it's growing a lot, and that's
yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we hear that a lot of times too when we talk about it, that there's too many fishing guides and they're taking all the fish. And
yeah,
guides are very good at what they do, and they do have a big impact on things. But clearly, it is a everybody issue with the amount of pressure on our fishery. We have a lot of private recreational anglers taking trips out there for sure.
right. And I tried to summarize this, and what I did is I didn't really account for the ups and downs as much as like the general trend of these charts. But I tried to look at the last 10 years. So this goes 2013 to 2023 is the last 10 years. Just looking at the growth, and the rec trip growth has grown around 24% over that range. And if I just use the MRIP guide thing, it's grown like 60%. That's, it's probably a lot of part-time guides, I'm guessing, included in that. But the point is, I want you to remember this 24% number, because the next chart is data that I pulled from like basically a South Carolina government office that I think is like tax assessing. So they have pretty good hand on population growth. And I pulled it's by county. So I pulled some coastal counties from Beaufort all the way up to Georgetown and Horry County and Charleston. I had to include Berkeley because I know it's growing so fast. But what this does is it splits it out by 5 years. So you have the last 10 back to 2015, but it also projects it out another 10 years. And I looked at the percent growth on that by county, and just in these coastal counties, if you average them out, it's 22%. Well, the growth in rec trips is 24%. And I'm not saying that's correlated, but it sure seems correlated to me, and it makes sense. Like the more population growth, the more boats on the water, the more people fishing. It makes sense to me that that's not um, a mistake. But the other thing this shows is that the projections going forward are following the same trend. So we're looking at another 25% growth in the next 10 years. Um, so the pressure on the waterways is going to continue to increase.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to think that that number of trips for us in coastal South Carolina is going to go down anytime soon. We would project that to
Yeah, this is just going to
continue to increase over time.
keep following that trend.
Yeah.
It sure is. And you see it like just as an angler on the water. I'm seeing more boats than I've ever seen. And on a random weekday, it's there's boats that used to be like the same as it would be on a Friday or Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of mirrors what we see on the roads. The traffic's gotten insanely bad here as people move here, and it's just it's kind of like it's kind of obvious to me, but that's going to continue as well. Um, I did pull this up just briefly just to make a point, and that is like I've been tagging red drum for 12 years now. Now, this is not my fish, but this is an example of an extreme case of the pressure that it's on our fisheries inshore, where this one fish has been caught and recaptured. Was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times caught and released, which says a lot for the fact that people chose to release that fish. I always think, did that person, the eighth person in line, realize that the 7 people before them chose to give them that fish as a gift, releasing it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, um, but one thing we didn't really talk about is the behavior of fish inshore is that they're really vulnerable, because that's another thing I've learned from tagging is that I'll have fish captured the next year on the same exact piece of structure as I tagged it the year before.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take long to see, like you can just see where people are fishing. You can deduce that the certain dock probably holds fish. And my thought is always that, like, how many fish do you think are on that dock? Is it, let's say it's 30, which is probably a lot. If every person came and caught and kept their limit, they would clear that dock out for one, but then those fish would never be back the next year either.
That's right.
So they're really vulnerable because they're such creatures of habit. And 10 years ago, it used to be still, they had a little bit of an advantage because you had to have a lot of experience to know, and time on the water to know where to find those fish. But technology and education, between, you can go to YouTube, you can be a member of Salt Strong. They'll give you the knowledge and the tools to go out and be successful really, really fast. But you can also go out and just buy yourself a game by getting a forward-facing sonar and just spotlight the thing around and actually count the fish in a certain place. Find them in places you never knew that they were, and and catch them. And that's it's interesting to me. Like I get rolling on this all day, but I don't want to. But my point is that if you're in a catch and release fishery like largemouth bass, like, it's maybe not so much of an impact, but we sponsor at iStrike, we sponsor a Bass Pro, and he'll say, yeah. He goes, but man, he goes, talk about crappie. He goes, if I want to go catch crappie, I used to sometimes go and struggle to catch them. He goes, now I'll just go and catch my limit in a snap of a finger. So it's like, if you're in a catch and take fishery, those fish are under threat by that technology because there's nowhere for them to hide.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling of foreboding about the future unless people are really become a lot more conservation focused, like a lot more caring about the future and wanting to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points I wanted to make. Looking at this graph here, for one, absolutely, just the number of people fishing is increased, but that technology, not just the sonar, but everyone's got a spot lock. I wouldn't be without a spot lock trolling motor now.
Yeah.
People are fishing drones, in shallow water areas and throwing them up to spot fish, that sort of thing. Certainly makes it hard for fish to hide. What I see on this graph, one way of looking at this is say, well, red drum are tough. That fish was caught 9 times and released and survived. And that is a testament to the folks that hopefully handled those fish in a good way and released them. What you're not seeing is all the other ones that were tagged and recaptured once, or twice, and then didn't survive that catch and release. This is an example of one that worked out well, but red drum are pretty tough. We estimate that about 92% of those fish are going to survive. So there's about 8% catch and release mortality associated with red drum. But you catch that fish 10 times and you multiply that out over time, and there's a much more likelihood of a fish not surviving catch and release over time. And so that combined with just the sheer amount of people out there fishing means that all those best handling practices that we always talk about are just even more important for red drum maybe than any of our other saltwater fish, just sheer amount of times that they're handled.
Right. And it occurs to me as well that how many times when we catch and release a red, just because you caught one that was tagged, it was only because you had someone that was a rec tagger who tagged it. Like, it's too bad these fish don't have a little counter on them, right? Because the one you catch and release, it might have been caught 5 times and released 5 times. You just don't know.
Exactly.
So it's interesting. But anyways, we're kind of like transitioning where I wanted to go into more like we got the facts on the table. You can't really dispute the numbers. Like it's legitimate how they're collected. So now what? Now, like, what can we do? Like, what are the things that we can do to help this fishery? Like, when you frame it in terms of we need to have better spawn, like, what can we do to help a spawn? It's like, protect the spawner. So you actually had a bunch of like focus groups and a survey that you did to kind of get where people are thinking. Like, can you kind of I was part of I think the first one.
Yeah.
It was a really good discussion. Like, we had a lot of longtime anglers there and a lot of guides, experienced guides. And you like, what did you schedule it for? Like an hour? I think it went like 2.5 or something.
Yeah, you guys didn't want to stop talking.
People wanted to talk.
Yeah.
So what are the outcomes from that?
Yeah, so we did a survey to a large group of saltwater anglers talking about what they're seeing in the red drum fishery, how they feel about current management, potential management changes, that sort of thing. But then we also did some hands-on sort of focus groups with 10 to 12 anglers in different places around the state, where we could have a little more informal conversation and get an idea. That was really more groups of folks that probably had more experience and more context for what an actual good red drum fishery maybe looked like 15 years ago. And so a lot of what we heard was, hey, we're still catching fish. I can go out there and I can find you some red drum and we can have a good day. But we talk about it further, and but we're not seeing as many schools of red drum as we were seeing, and we're not seeing as many fish, particularly in the schools that we're encountering, as we used to. So it's pretty fascinating. Even in the survey, when you break it down, the folks that fish a lot or have a lot of experience with fishing. If you've been fishing here 25 years and you're a pretty avid angler, you're much more likely to say, yeah, I'm seeing kind of a decline in the fishery. If you've been here for 4 years, and you don't really have context of what a good fishery looks like, you may say, this is amazing. The red drum fishing in South Carolina is fantastic. So a lot of it is just based on your baseline of what good fishing looks like versus what it is right now.
Right. A guy named Ty Hibbs from Louisiana, I'm not sure if he coined this phrase, but he called the shifting baseline theorem, which is exactly that, right?
Yeah.
And if you read books, like there's a great one called Gulf that talks about like the Gulf Coast from like turn of the century, or there's one called Plugger by Rudy Griner. He's a old-time Texas fisherman. Or even just listening to some podcasts where they've interviewed people who've been fishing for 40 years, 50 years, you understand what it could be and what it used to be. It's
Right.
nothing like it is today, right? But
Yeah.
like you said, if you just started fishing 2 years ago, it's the best it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
go catch, 3 fish. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all about your level of experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just I've been fishing here since 2006, so about almost 20 years. I mean, I've seen it. Like, I remember being in the Wando River in the wintertime and just seeing like a football field size of nervous water coming down the banks, 5
Hmm.
redfish in a school. Being able to go to almost any flat and find 100 fish that are like an aquarium swimming around.
Yeah.
And you just don't see it anymore. It's like you said, my on the water experience personally is what the numbers are saying. It's just there's a whole lot less fish to catch out there than there
Yeah,
used to
I think that's a good time. We haven't even really touched on it. Just to point out, there have been 2 formal stock assessments lately for red drum, and that stock assessment's when all the scientists come into the room with all the data from the different states. And so our stock of red drum is the east coast of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. Those are all considered the same stock of red drum. Everything from North Carolina to the north is part of that northern stock, completely different. Don't spawn together with our fish. But when all that data was put together, the results of that is that overfishing is happening, which, just to simplify that, it means that we're pulling more fish out of the population than we're adding back basically every year. And that the fishery is overfished, which is that spawning stock biomass we talked about. There's not a big enough mass of fish to be sustainable going forward. That's on a regional level. We just did our own South Carolina stock assessment using just data from South Carolina, all of that trammel net data, the long line, the electrofishing, our catch data, everything we talked about. Same results there. We're seeing, very similar to that regional assessment. And so all of that means, for one, there's some changes that will need to be made. We need to, the way red drum are managed, as part of an interstate fishery all the way. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission says that, if you're overfishing and overfishing is happening, you've got to make some changes to reduce the amount of fish that you're pulling out of the water. And so those are the things, the actual regulation type things like bag limits, slot sizes, adjusting slot sizes. And so we're in the process of, figuring out South Carolina DNR, what recommendations we need to make to our legislature that will achieve some of that reduction in the amount of fish that are being pulled out. But on the other side of that are some of the things I think you wanted to talk about, which are the sort of voluntary measures that can be taken to improve the fishery beyond just the regulations. Those may not be the sort of things that we can point to and say, well, that made a 20% reduction in the amount of fish harvested. But we know they're the sort of things that will have a positive impact on the fishery.
Mm-hmm. So some of the things I remember coming out of our focus group were things like using the proper tackle. So there's like a certain rig that DNR recommends that's like a fixed weight with a very short leader with a circle hook, inline circle hook, right?
Yeah, that's for those adult red drum. Both of those are very important. Fixed weight, so that not a sink or slide that can move up and down. Very short leader, and the idea is the combination of those is much more likely to catch right in the corner of that adult red drum's mouth. That's that Lupton rig, up in North Carolina that's mandated in some of the Pamlico Sound fishery already. If you've got a sink or slide, that leader can just become longer and get down into a fish's gut. So if you are going to fish for those adult fish, we absolutely recommend that you use a rig like that.
Mm-hmm. So other things I heard were like not lifting the fish out of the water, perhaps, like trying to remove the hook while it's in the water. Take a picture. You can lean over the boat, get a photo with the fish still in the water. This is what's already mandated in Florida for some of their species, right?
For tarpon over 40 inches in Florida, there's a keep the fish in the water regulation in place. That one's kind of universal too. That's one we talk about for small fish, for big fish. We're not saying don't pull your 18-inch fish out of the water, but minimize the time it's out of the water. That is as critical as anything else. Is get that fish out, get your be ready to take a quick pick if you're going to do that, but keep it wet, get it back in the water absolutely as quickly as you can, whether it's a 15-inch fish or a 40-inch fish.
Right. Yeah. One of our conservation partners, Keep Fish Wet, they talk about striving to have 10 seconds or less of air exposure. And when you think about that, I mean, you have to have a plan.
You do.
Can do it, but you got to
Mm-hmm.
be thinking ahead and have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to help. I mean, it's scientifically proven to make a big difference in the survivability of the fish, especially in the summertime, right? When it's hot, 80, 90, 80, high 80s, low 90s degree water.
Yeah, a lot less oxygen in the water during that time.
See a lot of people catching bull reds this time of year with a half a fish because the shark ate it.
Yeah.
You catch a fish that gets sharked, stop fishing for reds. I mean, you might be
move out of
killing
that area. Yeah,
you might be killing a 40-inch or 40-year-old breeder red drum. I mean, it's like, I don't know. You and I talked on the water. People are complaining that we have a problem with sharks, and we probably do have more than we've had in the recent memory. But I was reading a book written by Zane Grey, who was like a famous sport fisherman from the 1930s. I think I can't remember exactly the era. It was like early 1900s, and he had bought a boat and took the boat to the Galapagos Islands, which had never been fished by like an angler trying to catch like tuna and stuff like that ever, and he couldn't get a fish to the boat because it kept getting sharked. That's just a healthy biomass of fish. When a fish is caught and struggling, it's going to attract a shark probably, and if there's a healthy population of sharks, they're going to want to eat it.
Yeah,
it's just, I don't know what the answer is there, but I'm just saying that there might necessarily be a problem. It's a problem for fishermen, but it's like a healthy probably population of sharks.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely there are more sharks than there were before. There's been somewhat of an increase, but we know sharks are very smart too, right? Mm-hmm. So it's probably a little bit of combination of the amount of fishing pressure. The more time we spend in the same areas, and they become accustomed to boat motors and an easy meal in certain areas, and so those two things kind of work together. And it is a very difficult problem. And my only thing that I can say now is, if you're getting sharked by a fish and you don't move out of that area, you're just going to continue to donate fish to sharks. So I hate to say it, but if you're catching big fish in an area and they're getting eaten, then you probably need to move to a different area.
And you're reducing that biomass for the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Or, indirectly, they're doing it, but you're doing it too.
Yeah,
you're contributing.
Exactly.
So one thing, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've been talking about doing this actual broadcast for about over a year, I think. But I think one platform that we as Release Over 20 is going to advocate for is just, and it might not be popular with some people, but the thing is, it's directly in line with what we're all about, is that, we have a choice whether to fish for these fish while they're trying to spawn or not. And we're going to advocate for just like a no target. Let's just not go and try to fish for these fish in August and September. Let them spawn. Let's let some good year classes happen. Like you had mentioned something before, and you can't scientifically prove it, right? But if a fish is at the grillage or one of these places that's in deep water that's probably staging to spawn, and then you catch it, it's not likely to want to spawn again in the near future, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the I don't have the data in front of me right now to say if you catch a red drum, it has this impact on its eggs. But we know in kind of a long history of fishing on spawning aggregations around the world on different species. If you catch that fish, even if it survives, if it's during the spawning season, that female may have lower quality eggs. It may release its eggs prematurely. It may, it may impact its spawning activity going forward. So you caught that fish. We don't know whether it's going to spawn the next week or even that month, or maybe it skips, a longer period of time. And so beyond just outright losing a fish to, predation or to, just post-release mortality, it's common sense to think that catching them during the spawning season is not having a positive impact on spawning activity out there for sure.
Mm-hmm. You can file that under, that just makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Even though you might not have hard data to back it up.
Yeah, and we're working on it, but it's very difficult data to collect, on the impact of that, especially on these bigger fish. But we're working on it.
So, maybe just as concerned anglers that we want to do the right thing, we just choose not to fish for them during those months and let them successfully spawn. Target them in June, target them in, October, November. They're still around. You can still have fun. You can still catch a giant trophy fish, but it just makes sense to not disrupt them while they're trying to spawn, because they're like accessible. They're right there. We can catch them. And there's a lot of them there. They're all aggregating to spawn. But should we? I think we shouldn't. If we want to do the right thing, we should just try to leave them alone.
Yeah.
And the thing is, even if you let's say you otherwise would go and target these fish during that time frame 10 times, maybe you cut it down to 5. Maybe you just be aware that that's what's happening during those months, and self-regulate.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Maybe we get 2 or 3, 4 years of good spawns, and then all of a sudden we got redfish everywhere. Wouldn't that be a great thing?
It certainly will not have a negative impact, and I think it will have a positive impact. As an agency, we're not saying you cannot go and fish for those fish that time, because it is legal to do so. But we are saying, if you can leave those fish, let them spawn during those times. Wait until the spawn is done in October. Those water temperatures are coming down. There's more oxygen in the water, so they're going to handle it better. The shark activity is not as strong during that time. It just makes sense to give them a break while they're spawning. And I love to mountain trout fly fish a lot. And, it's not a big deal up there to, everyone kind of knows when those, rainbows are spawning in the spring, or if the browns are spawning in the summer. You wouldn't be, trampling around on their spawning beds and fishing on them. That's just sort of the culture there. And, that hasn't always made its way to salt water, but it's something I think we need to start thinking about, is what can we do to protect these saltwater fish while they're spawning, that will just benefit the entire fishery, and help us add more fish to that fishery.
100%. It's just about, doing the right thing because it makes sense. That's really what we're all about. And I think, you advocated that as an organization, and we're the same way. We're not also telling people that they can't do what the law allows. No one's going to shame you for doing that. That's your choice. But the thing is, what we can do is arm you with the knowledge so you can make an informed decision. Because I think a lot of people, and I count myself as one of them, I always say this, but I want to do the right thing, but I didn't always know anything about the fish that I was catching. And now that I know, it completely changes my behavior. And I think the more that we can all collectively do to get the average angler to be armed with that knowledge, that it's going to have it. And it's not going to affect everyone, but I think a lot of people do want to do the right thing, and they want a better future for their kids and grandkids. So this is a really good way that we can make an impact today, specifically for redfish in South Carolina. We know there's a problem. We know we need to protect the breeders. Let's protect the breeders and protect the spawn, and just go fishing for something else. There's a lot of other options.
Yeah.
In our state, we have an abundance of different fish to catch. So anyway, that's I think this was great.
Yeah.
I hope our listeners got something out of it. And man, I appreciate you for joining me and giving us your knowledge and time.
Absolutely. Love the organization. I'm a big Release Over 20 supporter. So
I know you are. Thank you.
we appreciate the work that you guys do.
Yeah, I mean we're working hand in hand along with CCA and a lot of other organizations that are worried about other things like water quality and all that stuff. So together, I think we could make a better future together. So
Yeah.
thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Yeah, man. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Well, like I said, I hope you all got something out of this. I think this was a great discussion. Um, some of the effects or some of the things that we need to do might be hard to swallow at first, but if you think about it, it makes sense. We can all try to just give these fish a break, protect the spawners. If you're getting shark catching a bull red, stop fishing, go move to a different spot, things like that. I really believe that it's not going to take um, a whole lot from a large population to make a significant change. And time will tell if I'm right or wrong. But appreciate you all for listening, and we'll be following up with some other discussions in the near future. But again, thanks for listening, and thanks for following Release Over 20. All right, take care.